Don't panic. I know I look and sound a little different today, but I promise it's just temporary. Unless you really like me as a kobold or sounding sick. Some of you know that I went out of town for Pride and came back sick, so I might sound a little bit funny. As for being a kobold, that's just to fit the video theme, and definitely not a side effect of getting sick or any vaccines I took. Anyway, let's get started. The furry fandom is well known, infamous even, for taking works that might be considered non-furry and turning them furry. You might immediately think of Pokemon like Lucario, Gardevoir, or Lopunny, who aren't furry but possess some anthropomorphic traits like a human body type, and then turning them into something even more like a furry, or even leaving them the same, but cuter. But I mean more like taking something that you wouldn't consider furry and making it anthropomorphic. Things like planes being turned into aeromorphs, or the recent anthropomorphism of trains, and the less anthro Pokemon out there, like Pikachu. Then they become synonymous with the fandom. One of these things is what we're talking about today. Hello everybody! My name is Sera Proto, and I come from not space with videos for your face. Here on Sera's Things, I talk about mostly original species and icebergs. This creature we're talking about today isn't really an original species, as it has roots in Germanic folklore that has been changed and adapted over hundreds of years until it was twisted into these adorable little furry creatures. But if you've seen my videos, you know that I have a pretty loose definition on what I consider to be an original species. I should go back to calling this furry fandom species to be a little bit more accurate, but original species to me need lore, design, and community, and kobolds do have that to some extent. Also, quick fun fact, when I was making this channel, I wasn't sure what species I wanted the mascot to be, so I was almost a pink kobold. Now when I say kobolds, you probably think of this, the short, chubby, cute, and oftentimes thick reptilian humanoids. But this is only their most recent iteration. Kobolds have gone through many different changes over the centuries before furries took them and made them cuter. Unlike many of the original species I cover, where I have to scour the net and scrape the bottom of barrels for lore, this creature has an immense amount of lore, books and books worth, and I found it almost immediately. Which makes a ton of sense. This creature dates all the way back to the 1200s, making them over 800 years old. As for describing them, that's where things get a little weird and you start to see a bit of a disconnect between what we call the modern kobold and the traditional or old kobold. Old bold. Kobolds come in a few different variants and can have different appearances depending on what they do. Some who work and help around the home may appear as human-like creatures, but they can also appear as humans, objects, and even fire. Yeah, just straight up as fire. The ones who live in homes are only as tall as a small child, which is at least where we got our height, and typically dressed in rags. As written by a folklorist called Joseph Snow, kobolds are in the shape of a short, thick-set being, neither boy nor man, but akin to the condition of both, garbed in party color, loose surcoat, and wearing a high-crowned hat with a broad brim on his diminutive head. That's great, and I'm sure that's incredibly descriptive, if only I spoke Old English. Basically, from what they're saying here, is kobolds are little dudes who dress badly. If we dissect the thing here, though, there's a couple of things that didn't change, like thick-set being. That didn't change. Neither boy nor man. Reptile is my favorite gender. And broad brim hat on his diminutive head. Well, I don't know many of us that wear hats, but the diminutive head part didn't change. The other variants of kobolds have different names, like a fiery kobold may be called drakes, droks, or pucks. Fiery kobolds were described as also little dudes who wear a red jacket and cap and can move around through the air as a fiery bolt, but of course these descriptions changed over the years as more people claimed to see them firsthand. Honestly, the info on them is tremendous, and a video could be made on covering just the Wikipedia entry alone, and that would easily be an hour long itself. And that's just from the 1200s onwards. The kobold is connected to many other similar creatures spanning back into ancient Greece, where there are even tales of a koboloi tricking Heracles. But all you need to know is that they're silly little mischievous guys who dress like tiny humans called children and help with chores or are hunched over, ugly, and live in mines. There are no in-betweens. Sponsor time! Guten Morgen, Herde. Today we have a sponsor, and it's a good one. Babel. Perfect sponsor for a video that's about creatures from Germanic lore. I didn't need much German for this video, but the practice was still useful to get pronunciation right. Babel is a language learning app that teaches you languages in the way that you would naturally learn them, by introducing you to the languages in a conversational fashion. It's not a vocabulary or spelling app like some of those free ones on the App Store. Nowadays, you get what you pay for. And that's what Babel is offering. 75% of the people who pay for a Babel subscription hit their language learning goals. And this isn't bunk either. Babel uses proven methods to teach you languages fast, and is vouched for by Yale University and Michigan State University. Best of all, you're learning from humans. Real native speakers. No AI, no machine learning here. People talking to people, and people learning from people. Just how it was always meant to be. Babel says that you can be conversational in just 3 weeks, so take the Babel test with me by getting a subscription from the link in the description and comments, or join me live on twitch.tv/SeraProto at 6 p.m. CST, -6 GMT, and watch me study German live. Alright, nun zurück zum Video.
It was a little cold, so I put it in on his sweater.
When we left for the sponsor spot, we finished the section about the Germanic kobold, aka the silly little humanoid who has zero drip. I thought that was the end, but I found a story published in 1912 called The Fairies and the Christmas Child. In one chapter, we meet a kobold, but the overall story isn't about Christ like you might think based on the name, but about a boy named Chris, born on Christmas. It's not even about Christmas, aside from the first chapter. It's about a child running away from home because his dad doesn't get him anything on his birthday/Christmas. Which blows, but his father is poor and overworked, so the kid's kind of a dick too. No heroes. No heroes in this story. After running away, he meets the Queen of the Fae, who tells him that he was born on Christmas so he can speak to other fairies. The rest of the book is about him meeting various fae and speaking to them. The book is in the public domain, so you can read it for free if you want, and I recommend checking it out if you love fairy folklore, as the writer covers stuff even the biggest monster manual buffs haven't heard of. But I won't be reading the whole thing, it is very long. This chapter is the same length as my script, so it's a 15 to 20 minute section, so make use of the chapters, or skip ahead to the time on screen if you want to see the next part instead of hearing my little story. But, like Pretentiosaurus said, it's definitely an interesting point to make note of, a great example of ways an idea can be utterly twisted without regard for the original concept. So yeah, it might not be entirely related, but it'll give you an idea of how much the lore's been twisted. So I present The Little White Feather by Lillian Gask, and illustrated by Willie Pagani. If you've ever tried to count the raindrops, you will know how I felt when for 3 whole days it poured in torrents. I was alone in the library, watching a hole in the wainscoting through which a mouse had just poked her head, when someone said, "Guten Morgen," in a piping voice. I don't think that was piping. I think that was a little gruff. And I knew this must be a kobold. I was rather surprised that I had not met one of these house spirits before. He was sitting on the edge of a bookcase, a little brown man with a wrinkled, good-natured face and wearing no clothes. He chuckled when I said that I would rather speak English if he did not mind, and remarked that all languages were the same to him. "I believe you met some cousins of mine, the brownies," he went on affably, kissing his hand to the mouse, who popped back into her hole as if he had shocked her. "They're good little chaps, but quiet and humdrum. You always know what a brownie will do, but as for us mortals, you can never tell what a kobold will be up to next. We make ourselves quite at home in their houses, and really own them, if the truth were known. But excuse me, I should not appear before you in this undress." In the twinkling of an eye, the kobold had changed himself into a curly-haired boy with smooth pink cheeks, and a red silk coat, and knickerbockers. Pants? Pants. Of dark green velvet. "This is my best suit," he explained proudly, turning himself from side to side. "I usually wear it when I play with children who were born, like yourself, at the blessed feast of Christmastide. It is only one of my many disguises, however. Though I seldom allow myself to be seen at all, I can even hide in the cast-off coat of a harmless snake, and woe to him who lays stick upon me or seeks to drive me away. The Heinzelmenschen, as we are called, can be bitter foes as well as powerful friends, and 'twas an evil day for the city of Köln. When we marched out of it, it has never since prospered." "Why?" I began, and the kobold held up his hand to stop me, puckering his baby face into a dreadful frown. Why, he mimicked. How, like the child of mortal man, everything has to have a reason. You rob the peach of its velvet bloom, that you may find the secret of its ruddy splendor, and the fairy gems on the grass at dawn to you are but water distilled from earth. You would know how the tide finds a way to turn, why the light of the stars transcends your rushlights. Elves and fairies and such like things are driven away by your curiosity, as the Heinzel mentioned were by Rosetta. I was going to ask who Rosetta might be, but I remembered just in time that this would be another question, and the kobold hates questions. The kobold chose a more comfortable seat and told me of his own accord. You know what? Maybe this guy has a little bit more of a high-pitched voice, not a deep little gruff man voice. They look like little they look like little gruff old men, so maybe we'll just use a higher pitched voice, because it sounds like they're supposed to have a higher pitched voice. Toward the end of the 18th century. No, I'm not doing that. He began. The Heinzelmannchen took up their abode in the city of Köln, where Johann Farina distilled the sweet scented waters now famous all over the world, when he first blended the fragrant oils of bergamot, citron, orange, and rosemary. It was we who whispered to him in what proportion he should mix them, and how to imprison their lasting perfume. Not only him did we help, but wherever we came across a worthy fellow who was poor but honest, we gave him a lift up. Such was Rudolph the tailor, whom we found when a lad on the steps of the great cathedral, without a pfennig in his pocket. Pfennig is German money, and with a wolf inside him, big enough to swallow a little pig. When we saw how readily he turned a taller, that rolled to his feet to the feeble old woman who had dropped it, though he might well have said he had not seen it fall, we took him to our hearts, and we swore to befriend him. So what the kobold's saying here is that this dude, even though he was really poor, big money dropped out of the lady's pocket and rolled towards him, and him being the honest man he took the money and gave it back to the woman who dropped it, and that's how the kobolds knew that he was a good dude. So, we said to one another, Rudolph is worthy to be our comrade, he is a good lad, and henceforth we will see that he does not go with want. Meaning that he has all of his needs met. The first thing to be done was to procure him decent clothing, for no one would employ him while he went in rags. We did this by pointing him out to the wife of a rich merchant, who fancied she saw in his pinched white face a likeness to the son she had long lost since. Touched by the poor lad's poverty, she gave him a suit of clothes which had lain by for many a day, and on finding he was an orphan, apprenticed him to a tailor. The lad worked well. We took it in turns to sit beside him, showing him just where to place his needle, so that his seams were always neat, and guiding his scissors so that he cut the cloth to the best advantage. So skillful did he become at that, when his time was out, his master begged him to stay with him as head assistant, and he gave him a good wage. So this just gives you a really good idea of like how kobolds are. Kobolds are not bad dudes. Kobolds, if you have a kobold's favor, you are a very lucky person because they want to help. If you're their homie, they take care of their homies. A fine young sprite was Rudolph now, with jet black hair and eyes like coals. His master's daughter, Euryale, and Rosetta both looked on him with favor, and for a time it seemed that he knew not which to choose. Euryale was small and slight, with eyes like a dove's. Rosetta was tall and buxom. Buxom means hot. And had she been free from the voice of curiosity, would have made him a model wife. She was clever and industrious, as well as witty, and when dark Rudolph passed by gentle Euryale and took Rosetta for his betrothed, it was only the Heinzelmännchen who shook their heads. Never was grander wedding feast than this. Heinzelmännchen, by the way, they're referring to brownies, which is like another goblinoid kind of creature, another gremlin, another small creature like the not like the goblins, like the kobolds, the traditional kobolds. Never was there a grander wedding feast than his. While he and Rosetta were still in the church, we brought to his house the finest drinking vessels that we could lay our hands on, and pots and pans of beaten copper that were the envy of every housewife bidden as a guest. There were fairy cakes in the silver dishes. Fairy cakes are, they're cupcakes. They're basically cupcakes. They're a single serving size cake that, you eat at a party. There were fairy cakes in silver dishes and luscious fruits that grew in no western lands. The wine in the ruby goblets was honeyed nectar, and though his friends quaffed deeply, quaff means eat, Their heads remained quite clear. A proud man was Rudolph as he drank to his bride, and she looked so happy and gay and bright that we resolved to take her too under our protection. And this we did. When her child came, we rocked the cradle and sang them lullabies while she baked and brewed, and when they slept, we scrubbed and polished from garret to cellar. Garret means the attic, so he scrubbed from attic to, the basement, until her house was the pride of the street. Often she would ask to be allowed to see us, but we always refused, telling her to respect our wish and be content. Still, she would not rest, and nothing that Dark Rudolph could say to her would induce her to hold peace. He had now 3 shops instead of 1, and counted lords and barons among his customers. No one could fit as he could, for we were always at hand to nip in here and let out there, and many a fine straight figure was the result of our cunning skill. His fame spread far from the neighboring towns, and one spring a great noble traveled to Krone to order some rich apparel for himself and his suite. Krone, by the way, is a city, and I'm very sure I'm pronouncing that right, or that wrong. I'm very sure I'm pronouncing that one wrong. Our busy tailor, maybe I should take more babble lessons. I almost did that in the voice. Our busy tailor was at his wit's end how to get finished in time, for all his assistants were working their hardest, and they were still behind. "Have no fear, Dark Rudolph," we cried when we found him alone. "Send your men to rest and leave it to us. When you wake in the morning, you shall find all of it done." We lost not a moment that livelong night. It was as if our needles had wings. I'm gonna ditch the voice. I've been sick for a while. This is wrecking my voice. Okay. We lost not a moment that livelong night. It was as if our needles had wings. Just before cockcrow, the door of the workroom creaked softly open, and there stood Rosetta in her white nightgown, with her hair in 2 long plaits. Plaits is just, it's fancy for braids. With her hair in 2 long plaits, peering round the corner to see if she could catch us at work. We were justly enraged, but since we heard her in time to render ourselves invisible, and also because we loved Dark Rudolph, we decided to give her one more chance. It was our custom to leave the lower part of the house at the hour of midnight, no matter what we might be doing, and climb the steep stairs that led to the bedrooms, to watch the ghosts, which were free to roam till cockcrow. Cockcrow means when the sun comes up and the rooster crows. To watch that the ghosts were free to roam till cockcrow might not ruffle the children's hair, or wake them with their long-drawn sighs. Rosetta knew this, for she had often heard us comforting the little Rudolph when his sleep was disturbed by a bad dream, and with gross ingratitude she tried to befool us. One night she strewed dry peas on top of the steps of the winding staircase so that when we came up we should lose our footing and fall to the bottom, and thus she might see us struggle on the ground. We knew perfectly well, however, why she had bought the peas and stayed below. When she rose next morning, she forgot the trap she had laid for us and tumbled headlong down into the stairs. While she groaned and moaned over her broken ankle, the Heinzelmännchen marched out of the town to stirring music, which was heard by all the citizens. We sailed down the Rhine in a phantom boat, which you may yet see floating on the waters if you look for it at the right time, and Dark Rudolph and his Rosetta sighed for our help in vain. The kobold was certainly a most entertaining little fellow, and stayed with me all the morning, telling me of well-known house spirits of days gone by. One of these tales was about Hinzelmann, said the kobold solemnly. I could not find pronunciation for this word. It's a city, I believe, so I will probably pronounce it wrong, but it goes, was a spirit who haunted the castle of Hudemühlen, though it was not late in the 16th century that those who lived there were aware of his presence. He seemed of so friendly a disposition that the servants became quite used to him. They never saw him, but he would often talk with them while they worked, telling them of what went on in the underworld, and of the mighty giants of bygone days who had been created in order to protect the dwarves from savage beasts, but had become themselves so savage in the course of the ages that they had to be done away with. In time the lord of the castle heard of his strange visitor, and sent him a message saying he desired his presence at a certain hour. "No need to wait until then, good sir," laughed Hinzelmann over his shoulder. I assist you each morning with your lordship's toilet, though you do not perceive me, and I blunt your razors when you are out of temper." This displeased the lord of the castle, for he thought it unseemly to be on terms of such familiar intimacy with a bodiless house spirit. When he rebuked him for his presumptions, Heinzelmann laughed more loudly still. "Better men than you have to put up with my company, if I will," he cried, "and believe me, I do not intend to leave you." The nobleman grew more and more uneasy, for it disturbed him to feel that he was never truly alone. Heinzelmann whistled and sang through the staterooms, and when his lordship expressed irritation, this was the house spirit's favorite song. Oh boy, I have to sing. "If thou here wilt let me stay, good luck shalt thou have alway. But if hence thou dost me chase, luck will never come to this place." That's how you know it's a good poem, when it cuts out a consonant so it doesn't break syllable count. He hummed this morning, noon, and night until the lord of the castle was sick of it. "Since I cannot drive this fellow away," he said at last, "I must e'en go myself." And telling no one of his intentions, he summoned his coach and set out for Hanover. On the way, he noticed that no matter how fast his horses went, a little white feather danced above their heads. Although he wondered at this, he did not connect it with the house spirit, and when he arrived at the chosen inn, sought his couch with a mind at ease. "Thank heaven," he muttered, as he turned him over and went to sleep. "I am free at last of this trouble, Heinzelmann. By the time I see fit to return home, he may have gone elsewhere." Next morning, he missed his fine gold chain, which was an heirloom, and, greatly distressed, he haughtily demanded of the innkeeper that his servants should be searched. "They've robbed me," he cried, "and they shall suffer for it. Cannot one sleep at your house without meeting with knaves and thieves?" At this, the innkeeper was very angry. Instead of condoling with the nobleman on his loss and offering to make it good, he roundly rebuked him for taking away the character of honest men without due proof. The noble was leaving the inn in much haste when a soft voice asked him why he was troubled. "If it be on account of the bauble which you set such store, look under your pillow and you will find it. You cannot get on without Heinzelmann after all." "I would, had I never known you, base spirit," stormed the nobleman. "You have put me greatly in the wrong with all of these men, and my journey has been for naught since you are here. If you do not quit me, I will leave this country. It is not wide enough to hold the both of us." Then Heinzelmann spoke to him with much reason, pointing out that he wished him no harm, and that it was impossible to shake him off, since wherever the lord went, he could follow. "It was I who flew as a little white feather in front of your coach. You played the part of a poltroon when you fled from what you believed to be evil, instead of fighting it on your own ground. Come back with me, and if you give me your friendship, I will work but good to you and yours." Poltroon, by the way, it means coward, or wuss. So he was saying that the nobleman fled like a coward. So the nobleman went back to the castle, and Heinzelmann lived there with him. A little room was set aside for his use in an upper story, and here they placed, by the nobleman's orders, a small round table and a tiny bed. No one could ever make out if he slept on this, but once when the cook entered very quickly to take him the dish of new milk and wheaten crumbs, which was placed each morn on his table, she saw a shallow depression on the pillow, as if something very small and soft had rested there. When the time came for Heinzelmann to leave the castle, he presented its lord with 3 fairy gifts, the last of these being a leather glove richly wrought with pearls and a curious pattern of snails and scrolls. So long as this glove was in possession of his house, he told him, so long would his race flourish. And thus he requited the kindness which had been shown to him. "There is nothing that we like better than to help our friends." "I know," I said, nodding my head, and the spirit smiled as if this pleased him. We're back to the little boy. "We need to take no credit for this," he remarked, "since the Dwarf King himself sets us the example. His rescue of the poor old couple at Schillingsdorf is one of many instances of the way in which he gladly helps those who show hospitality to him or his kind." So yeah, these kobolds are wicked good dudes, and as you'll see later, kobolds have a tendency to, once they find an object of worship like a dragon, they have this obsession to constantly worship and help them, even if the dragon, for example, were to reject them. So as you'll see later on, this trait remained true throughout. Kobolds will, once they find a dragon, they will give them gifts, and should the dragon reject them, they'll continue giving the dragon gifts in secret. So this little bit is still present in modern, in the modern story, of modern kobolds, that once they find someone to help, they will not leave them. They'll turn invisible and continue to help them if they have to. Alright, let's continue. Caught in a storm, he wandered from door to door, entreating each person who answered his knock to let him enter and warm himself. Once and all they refused, for his green velvet garments were stained and draggled, and they had not the wit to see that in spite of his dripping clothes and disheveled beard, he was still every whit a king. At last he came to the hut of an ancient shepherd, whose little old wife was as thin as he, for food had been very scarce. The moment she saw the wanderer, her heart went out to him. "Come in and welcome, you poor little fellow," she said, setting her wide door. "Our fire is not much of a boast, but 'tis better than none on a night like this." And the shepherd hobbled to the inner room that he might bring his Sunday coat, and placed this round their visitor's shoulders, while his own lay drying on the hearth. When the old woman spread a white cloth on the table and gave the dwarf her share of the coarse black bread, which was all her cupboard contained. "I thank you, my friends," he said, breaking the bread into 2 fragments. As he did so, one became a fine white loaf, and the other a noble cheese. The dwarf laughed at the old couple's amazement, and bade them feast to their heart's content. "So long as you leave on the platter of crust a bread and an inch of cheese," he said, "so long will a fresh loaf and fresh cheese spring from these fragments during the night. But if ever a beggar entreats your help, and you refuse him, they will turn to dust and ashes. Now I bid you farewell, but ere long shall we meet again." So saying, he went out into the rain. Despite this... Ooh, that kind of gave me chills. That was a little ominous. So saying, he went out into the rain, despite their entreaties that he would at least stay with them until the storm was over. Little sleep did they have that night, for wind and rain swept through the valley, torrents roared down the mountainside, flooding the wooden houses, and even worse befell at daybreak. An enormous rock snapped off from a topmost peak, and carrying with it great masses of stones and uprooted firs, crashed down onto the little village. All living things were buried beneath its weight, except the shepherd and his wife, whose cottage was yet spared. Tremblingly, they stood at the threshold, for they thought their last hour had come. "Thou hast been a good wife, my dear one," breathed the shepherd, as he drew her frail form close to him. "It is well that we should go together, since thou hast lain by my side for nigh 60 years, she whispered, hiding her face against his breast. "How now?" cried a reassuring voice. Dost thou despair so easily?" And looking up, they saw their friend, the dwarf, riding on a rough raft in the center of the stream, and steering before him the trunk of an immense pine. This he proceeded to fix crosswise in front of their little garden, so as to form a dam. The torrent now passed by the cottage, leaving it undisturbed, and the voice of the wind was hushed. The sun came out, and the birds sang, but the only people alive in Schillingsdorf were the shepherd and his old wife. "How now?" cried a reassuring voice. And that is the end of the chapter about the kobolds. So, it wasn't super related, but I didn't read this beforehand, so there were some things in here that I learned. I ended up finding this after I wrote the original script, and I was like, oh, okay, it's probably not super important. And then I asked people on YouTube, and people on YouTube, you all said that you wanted to hear it, so I read it. Hopefully I was good at telling stories. And I don't think Babel could help my pronunciation on that one, but you know, you'll probably have better luck. But as we saw, there are lots of parallels between the kobolds of the modern sort that we're familiar with, the as you'll find out later, the worshipping business, their tendency to stay hidden from their object of desire, and their sneakiness. It wasn't super related, but it was a good story. Like I said, if you want to check out the rest of this story for yourself and learn much more about fairies and fae and stuff like that, the story's entirely free because it's in the public domain, because it's over 100 years old now. Alright, so we're going to get back onto the regular script now. So it'll be back to shirtless me. So take it away, shirtless me. I already did a sponsor spot, so I'll make this one quick. If you want to be a kobold, here are some options. First, I made this video because Bubblegum Bark made a kobold model, and they've sponsored videos in the past, so I thought I'd toss them this freebie. Check out BGB on Gumroad, link in the description. They make models for VR chat, but you can convert them to VRM and use them for VTubing as well. The model I'm using right now, the one you're looking at, this one, me, on the screen, is by Thingy. I wanted to be a tinier kobold, so I picked this one. And there is another good kobold model on Gumroad by Don't Jinx It. Don't Jinx It is probably the cheapest one at $20, and you don't have to buy a license in order to use it for VTubing. All the models are good though, and have their own benefits, just letting you know your options before you join the Kobold fold, but if you want something custom, you should hire my model maker, Low 3D Arts. They do digital art, along with 3D art and custom VR chat models. And lastly, if you're enjoying the video, you should like, subscribe, comment a lizard emoji, or you know what? Ooh, comment, is there a gem emoji? Comment some gem emojis so that I can give them to my dragon wife. Check me out on twitch.tv/SeraProto, and if you like this snazzy sweater I'm wearing, you can get it in the shop below the video. If you super like the video, click the super thanks to donate a few bucks. It's just below the video. YouTube has been demonetizing a lot of my videos, even some of my older stuff, so this, really helps. Even $2 helps more than ad revenue. Alright, back to the video. There are other interpretations of kobolds that you might have not seen, like in the famed tabletop game, Kobolds Ate My Baby. In Kobolds Ate My Baby, you play a little gremlin called a kobold. This game was designed to be a funny, short-played game where you roleplay as kobolds causing trouble or trying their best to help. If you want an idea of how short this game is meant to be, look no further than the stat chart and its very minimalist character sheet. We have every important stat a kobold needs, like eat feet, which I won't do on the first date, eat meat, you have to take me to dinner for that one first, and cheat. I don't have a joke for that one. The main difference between these kobolds and modern kobolds is that they're fuzzy in an attempt to make them cuter. But if you're a furry, or looking at me, you know we can make things cute without adding fur, although it does help. Fast forward to modern times, and we have a little known tabletop game that's even more obscure and less well known. But it's where pretty much every aspect of koboldism comes from. This modern depiction of kobolds is from Dungeons & Dragons. I know, it's a real sleeper hit. You have to be careful, blink and you might miss this one. Almost nobody plays this. In Dungeons & Dragons, kobolds are reptilian humanoids who live a tribe-like lifestyle where they worship a dragon in exchange for protection. They'll live in caves or dungeons where dragons live and build traps to kill adventurers, then take their gold, gems, weapons, and armor and give them to the dragon they worship instead. Basically, they're a little army of simps who donate gold and gems to their streamer dragon in hopes they get recognized for it. But they never do. Thus is the life of a dragon simp. Thankfully, Dungeons & Dragons is almost 800 years old, so there's just as much lore for them as there is for the little old man kobolds. And unfortunately, all of this lore is actually relevant to the kobolds we're talking about today, so I'm gonna have to go over it all. Despite furries taking and changing them, they didn't change much of the culture because, the idea of a little creature who throws gems at his dragon wifey is incredibly modern and relatable. Let's go over the D&D lore and you'll see what I mean by they didn't touch the lore. Personality. Kobolds are pretty short, standing at an average of 2 feet tall, or 61 centimeters for my tea-drinking viewers. Because of this height difference between them and the other races in D&D, they're often made fun of. Even dwarves and the average halfling are taller. Gnomes, of course, are shorter, but kobolds aren't spared from being made fun of. Due to being lawful evil by nature, they are often viewed as naturally covetous, and are despised or looked down on, sometimes literally, for that. But this hate quickly becomes mutual, as kobolds are often suspicious and hateful towards taller creatures because of the treatment from tall folks in their past. But they're creatures who do respect authority, to some extent, setting aside their hate when necessary, but are always down for a little rebellion. The kobolds can have a little rebellion as a treat. If you want an idea of their Napoleon complex, you only need to hear this quote from a kobold trap maker. "Even tall ones are shorter than me when they're lying on their backs and filled with spikes." Due to this height difference and strength difference, they make up for it with their large numbers and cleverness, often making use of traps, ambushes, and large pack tactics. These plans and tactics are so important to how they act and function that it's not uncommon for every kobold involved in the ambush to know the plans, and sometimes those outside of the ambush only need to ask. In their most secret, classified, locked down, lock and key plans, you just need to ask. They're very open about their ambush plans. Biology. I mentioned how kobolds often act in packs or much larger tribes, so just how often is a bouncing baby kobold brought into the tribe? Well, they're notorious for having the highest birth rate and being non-monogamous, meaning they rarely stick with one partner, which alongside their simpiness explains why some depictions in the furry fandom and games like Kobold Care show them as being highly promiscuous. They're not actually promiscuous, they're not human, so let's not pin human hang-ups on non-human creatures. A female kobold who is pregnant will lay an egg in just 2 weeks, with a tenth of those births leading to twins. Then an egg only needs to be incubated for 2 months, and within an afternoon, a freshly born kobold can walk and contribute to the tribe. They reach adulthood at only 6 years old. They're not just quick, they're hardy too. In the case that an egg were to break a couple weeks early, the premature kobold would still easily survive. This frequent egg-laying nature has led kobolds to have a dedicated henhouse to lay their eggs in while a foster parent looks over the eggs, meaning as soon as mom is done popping you out, she can head back to work. In the mines. There's some weirder stuff that goes on with them, but it's not super relevant to kobolds in the fandom. Kobolds are descendants of dragons, and sometimes that DNA shines through, and kobolds will be born with wings. Or, as the kobolds call them, dragon rot. A dragon rot whose connection to the draconic bloodline is especially strong and lends them some neat bonuses like longer lives and immunities to certain magic. Society. Yep, they live in one too. You might be familiar with kobold society, as a lot of it is where the memes come from. Kobolds, like many enemies in D&D, love forests and underground locales where they can easily ambush you and set up a variety of traps. Caves and dungeons sound like they might not have enough room to house our reproducing reptiles, but when one tribe becomes overpopulated, they'll split off into their own little tribes. These splits are usually settled in a little friendly, non-lethal combat. But, as I said, they respect authority, especially if the proposed leader is lawful evil as well. Despite splitting, and adventurers thinning them out for population control, these towns are packed elbow to elbow like clubs during a pandemic. Because of the size of these tribe kobolds, they don't have much of a concept of privacy or shame. When you have hundreds living in a small cavern, you don't have space for everyone to have a home or, I guess, clothes. Dressing 1,000 kobolds would probably take up a lot of cloth, and adventurers don't travel by the hundreds. So clothing is limited to functionality and rituals, but not to hide their filthy, sinful bodies. Even when around kobolds of different sexes, they just let that junk hang out. Jeez, kobold caverns sound like they smell something fierce. Cave dwelling is a natural fit for them, so don't feel too bad. Like Gen Z, they yearn for the mines. But you can see them doing all sorts of specialized jobs like dragon worship, trap making, and sorcery. They also have dark vision, so they don't need a bunch of RGB lights to illuminate their vitamin D deprived flesh. Among their other activities, kobolds love communal baths and swimming. Try not to imagine an oasis of naked scaly swimming. So how do kobolds leave their fold and join the world outside their caves? Exile. Kobolds love exile. Due to their extreme dependency on large numbers, being sentenced to forever alone is just as terrifying as failing their death saving throw, and kobolds live 135 years or longer, so alone until you fail your save is a really long time. But if one joins your party, they're a great time. Every little win is praised by them, and if they consider you among their tribe, then a win for the tribe is a win for them. They're a great emotional support like that because they don't care so much about the individual success so much as the success of everyone. Thank you, Comrade Kobold. I spelled comrade with a K in the script. Religion. I'll keep this section short because there are some nerdy D&D deity names and lore, and you only really care about the kobolds' worship of dragons. Kobolds love serving dragons. They view them as gods oftentimes, which isn't much of a leap for them. Kobolds are descendants of dragons, so kobolds see them as a higher version of themselves. If kobolds encounter a dragon, they will present it with tributes, gold, gems, loot, anything they think the dragon might like. They see even the act of serving a dragon or being consumed by one an honor. Stop thinking about Vor. In the case that a dragon doesn't want any kobold servants, the kobold will work for it in secret, satisfied with their paltry donations even if their favorite stream dragon doesn't notice them. Basically, if a kobold has decided to worship you, you're stuck with them. Better accept it, because eating them isn't an option because that's their kink. And that's it! Everything you needed to know about kobolds. The only things I left out was their diet. They're omnivorous, eating plants, animals, and the occasional adventurer. They're able to eat just about anything, even tree bark if they're desperate enough. They also shed, and their outfits of choice are pretty simple, typically consisting of tunics, breeches, loincloths, but won't turn down finery like silks, leathers, and tailored clothing. They're just like you, but small. I hope you enjoyed this video, and you learned more about our cute reptilian rivals and friends. Make sure to pamper your kobolds with fruit, head pats, and always say thank you when they give you a gift. Especially if it's someone else's arm. Thank you for watching! I was gonna say bye-bye, but that's not the thing I do when I'm a kobold. How would a kobold say goodbye? I also forgot to talk about their language. They talk in yips and yap, which is like, I think it's called Yip Yak, and it's a combination of Draconic with their own regional accent, which consists of yips and yak. So yip 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 yip. Yep, that's what the kobold do. They go yip. Yip yap. I'm guessing that's bye bye in kobold. I don't know. I hope I didn't just say something awful instead. Thanks to my patrons, Ceres, Blonsk, Ninjasum, Colorado Blue, Sly, Creeper Kitty, Vaderson, Linky, Kit Chimera, and special thanks to my newest patron, Moonman. Creatures like them make this tiny little cave a tiny little home. If you want your name up here, you can find my Patreon link in the description.